Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Wednesday video. Today, we're joined very kindly by the Battleship Texas Foundation. Many of you will have seen the video I did a few years ago on USS Texas, which, well, I say most of you have probably seen it. It has a fair number of views, but we're now going to talk about the state the ship's in as it is and how things are going to go forward, whereas that video was looking mainly at the past. So, welcome aboard. Would you like to introduce yourselves to tell us who you are?
Sure. I'm Travis Davis. I'm the Vice President of Ship Operations for the Battleship Texas Foundation, and well, I'm responsible for the preservation of the ship, the day-to-day preservation and long-term preservation planning of the ship.
Hmm. So, yeah, just a little bit of responsibility there.
Yeah, it's a little bit of responsibility.
Yeah. Um, right. So, as is traditional with these kinds of videos, we've prepared 10 questions, which will probably loosely guide what we're talking about. And so we'll start off with the first one, so for viewers who might not be aware of the situation, why does the Texas need a major overhaul?
So to answer that question, a little bit of history. So the ship has been a museum ship since 1948. Before that, it was an active warship for 32 years. So with a period of 2 years being laid up in Baltimore. Um, and during her time, particularly the end of her service life, she was very worn out, much like Warspite and other famous ships. The Navy pushed the older battleships hard because they needed them for shore bombardment duty. Several reports at the end of the ship's life showed that she was leaky and was old and ready to be put out to pasture, so to speak. So um, when the ship became a museum, the Navy put her through a dry dock cycle, and then she came to Texas in 1948, and it's been here since. And wasn't really dry docked until 1988. And for the record, the Navy recommends that any ship, for their ships that are laid up that are going to go back into service, they recommend that a ship be dry docked if it's in salt water every 10 years, if it's in brackish water every 15 years, and if it's in fresh water every 20 years, just to keep up the maintenance on the hull, to renew the coatings, that kind of stuff, to kind of help ensure that the hull lasts indefinitely. Well, this ship wasn't well, that didn't happen. So to the ship. So for the ship set for 40 years without going to a dry dock cycle. And during that part, as part of her original mooring plan, um, you know, she had the traditional mooring lines, mooring hawsers, and then on top of that, the original plan called for her to be ballasted down. So they ballasted the ship with brackish water, so the ship channel water, and then pumped mud around the ship. So when we looked at the ship in, say, in the 1960s and 1970s, there was only about 6 to 8 feet of water around the ship because everything had been pumped full of mud around. And what we found is the water on the inside and the water and the mud on the outside, really ate away at the ship's structure. And when the ship left for dry dock in '89, she was pretty heavy. She was really near her wartime full load displacement. She was that waterlogged. There weren't a lot of interior compartments flooded, but there was a lot of tankage that was flooded. So, and then after that dry docking, the next dry dock cycle that she had has not occurred yet. That was supposed to happen in the early 2000s. It failed. State funding was pulled at the last minute. And because the state had higher priorities than this, no fault on their part. Um, then that kind of became the genesis of the dry berth project, which has proven to be, for one, the engineering studies done very costly. So where we're at right now is, in the meantime, the ship has been deteriorating, and even through that dry berth project, we found that through surveys, we found that the ship needed significant structural repairs that occur over the last, really since 2013. There have been two major rounds of structural repairs, something along the lines of $40 million were pumped into the structure of the ship. And that money got us to where we are now, which is we need to address the hull of the ship, which is the main critical issue we need to address now, particularly the torpedo blisters and the bottom shell plating. With this project that we're doing right now, that will definitely address that. What we are doing in the future, or in this dry dock cycle, is going to be to pretty much completely replace the skin of the ship from the waterline down, or roughly 2 feet above the waterline down. So that way we know the ship has a good solid hull through and through, and we don't have leaky riveted connections, or riveted connections that could fail, or things like that. So
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned a few bits there, sort of the shell, the torpedo blisters, etc. What are the biggest hurdles to overcome to get her ready for a tow? Because obviously she's been, apart from that one dry docking, she's been relatively static. So what parts of the ship really need a lot of attention to make sure, presumably, that sort of when the tugs start pulling, you don't pull the bow off or something like that?
well, fortunately, through the several rounds of engineering that we've done over the past 2 years or so, particularly really intensive over the last year, we found that the ship was in really good structural shape considering the repairs we put in. There's a few deficient areas that will get addressed in the drawdock, but they're not um, overly critical to the ship's um, towability. So, and we have ways of mitigating the stresses in those areas, which we've already started implementing. The biggest hurdle that we have in towing the ship is not so much as the strength of the ship, the global strength of the ship, but is more along the lines of um, the permeability of the hull. So the ship taking on water and that kind of thing. So I say that was an issue, or largely was an issue, because over the last 4 months, so pretty much from July through December, middle of December, uh, we, with our primary engineering group and our project management company, we subcontracted Resolve Marine, which is one of the premier salvage companies in the world, and we've pumped something like, off the top of my head, they put in 738,000 gallons of expanded foam into the hull of the ship, particularly into the blisters, and then a few other critical tanks to minimize flooding concerns. So what that does is the foam displaces volume. So it's not giving a direct buoyancy to the ship, but what it is doing is displacing volume so water can't come in, or if the water does come in, the floatable volume is so low that it won't affect the draft. The other thing it does is it reduces water migration within the ship, and then it gives a little bit of structural rigidity back to the fragile blisters. So, and these blisters are fairly unique in the sense that I know of. They're the only surviving examples of torpedo blisters left in the world. I mean, particularly on a capital ship. So, um, which is I think a fairly unique character defining feature to save, and which we are saving. So,
Yeah, because I'm just trying to think of the other museum ships that are around. You've got, well, the less said about Mikasa, the better. The poor thing's stuck in a lump of concrete. Or you've got obviously the Alabama, the North Carolina, the various Iowas, but they're all World War II. And then from World War One, off the top of my head, the only other large-ish World War One era ships that I can think of are, well, Caroline in the UK, but she's a light cruiser, so she's never going to have extensive torpedo blistering. Aurora technically is World War One, but really is more of a pre-dreadnought era ship in Russia. And that, I know, they basically shaved the entire bottom off the ship and rebuilt it. So that's, even if it had something, it's not going to matter now. So yeah, it's pretty much, as you say, that everything else of that period of any significant size has long ago gone to the scrapyard.
mhm.
So you mentioned all this foam that's being poured in everywhere. Is this obviously for transit? Is this foam a permanent feature of the ship? Is it going to be not possible to get it out, or will those spaces later be somehow emptied out of the foam?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We are removing the foam. So it is just a temporary measure to get the ship to the dry dock. Um, the uh, uh, the foam will most of the areas that we have the foam will be pulling the skin off the ship anyways. And then the foam we found it can be cut mechanically by hand saws, but also 10,000 psi water pressure washer will cut it, which is a little more powerful than the one that you can buy at the local hardware store. Uh, but it'll cut it and it'll come out fairly nicely. So uh, that's that's what we're doing it.
I was going to say 10,000 psi pressure cutter. That'll go through almost anything, I think.
It will, and that was one of the when we were being permitted by the state historical commission. So who all of the work that happens on the ship has to be permitted through an antiquities permit to ensure compliance with applicable state and federal laws. Um, the That was one question that was asked is, well, 10,000 psi, well, that'll rip up the steel. And it's like, not really. And if it does, it's steel that needs to be replaced anyways. So really to cut steel, it needs to be over 40,000 psi and usually have some kind of grit in it.
Yeah, and from the look of that, it's so lightweight, it's not going to be adding all that much to the ship's displacement.
No, I think we've made an increase the ship's draft by and at most an inch, but I think it's been a net even with the amount of water that we've displaced with the foam.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's the primary strategy that we have. And then as we get closer to being to towing the ship out, we're going to Resolve will come back aboard. There'll be more pumps layered aboard in critical areas, more electrical generating capacity added to handle those large capacity pumps, and then we'll make our way. And our intent is to keep the ship within protected waters, but we'll see.
Just a little bit of the Pearl Harbor salvage operations, where they were towing the ships once they'd raised them around with numerous pumps aboard, just to keep up with any water ingress.
Right.
So,
that's been the ship's life for the last since at least 2007. So I started with the ship in January of 2007, and for my entire time aboard, there's been at least one pump running almost continuously. By the time last summer, before we started with the foaming operation, we were pumping something along the lines of 1,500 gallons a minute. So it was something like upwards of 40 pumps running at any one time.
wow.
Yeah. So right now we're pumping 0 to 5 gallons. I think I haven't seen a pump run in the last month or so. So it has been surreal, and I still think I'm kind of in a dream a little bit. So
Yeah, the constant hum has kind of died off a bit.
Just a little bit, yes. And the constant having to worry about is that pump not running because that tank's out of water, or has that pump failed? So
Yeah.
there's been a lot of that, and a lot of having to scramble to replace a failed pump or this or that or the other to prevent further injury to the ship. So having those worries out of the way, it means a lot for the future of the ship, not just from a preservation standpoint, but also what the possibilities for the public are, as far as our ability to more fully restore the ship and to create more educational and interpretive opportunities for the public. So we're definitely trying to create a brand new visitor experience here that hasn't been had in the past. So a much more immersive, a much more interactive experience, so that when someone pays their admission, they come on the ship, they get the sense of what it was like to be on a World War One era battleship that was serving in the middle of World War II, and with 1,800 men aboard on a ship that was designed for 1,000. So and to have some of the experiences that those guys had. No, granted, we can't fully recreate those things, but we can do a good shot at that with some technology. So
Yeah, so I mean, well, related to that, obviously, the most of the additional men aboard Texas in World War II were mostly to do with all the additional anti-aircraft guns they'd stuck on it, which weren't the highest priority when the ship was originally built, considering that I think sailing into a strong breeze was probably enough of an anti-aircraft defense at that point. Um, so I know I have been following the progress of some of the work on Texas, and I know I saw sort of various small guns being craned off. There was a bit where someone opened the breech of one of the secondary battery guns and did a really nice cleaning job inside. So what's generally happening with the ship's smaller weapons, for the small guns? What are they being taken off? Are they staying in place for the minute?
Sure. The it's a really good transition, and we've removed almost the entirety of the ship's anti-aircraft battery, save two 40 millimeter mounts that have already been restored. We have an offsite facility that a company is generously donating to us. That company is NRG in the U.S. They're a major energy producer and transmission electricity transmission company. Um, and they've generated a large shop to us, and in a lot of their services as well, including painting and sandblasting and machining and those type of things, and welding. Um, so at that location, we're going to be, or we are rather, going through all the ship's anti-aircraft guns, disassembling them, cleaning them, restoring them to some capacity, and then reinstalling them back on the ship. For the most part, the bulk of them are going to just be restored to, or just restored preservationally. Uh, we aren't really exploring very deeply on the ability to blank fire or do those things yet. We certainly, potentially would like to do that in the future. I mean, we have been able to, um, just to give you an example, we're working on the ship's 3-inch guns, and these particular model 3-inch guns were installed on the ship in '48. They're not the same type that she carried during World War II. Uh, but these guns have been functional, so they'll point and they'll train. But they've been able to do that since '48. And any kid that's come to the ship since 1948, or any adult for that matter, has operated the 3-inch guns right as you come on the ship. So that's a very when someone talks about the ship, that's we're usually one of the first things that they talk about is that's their experience. So we want to try to keep that alive, to keep kind of building those those memories that stick with you, those sticky memories. So we keep folks coming back. Um, but so those guys have been able to point and train, but what they haven't done is they haven't been able to we haven't been able to open the breech blocks of them. So to check really the integrity of the barrels and that kind of thing. So we've managed to get 4 guns, the blocks open now. Those 4 guns we're currently working on. It's taking a lot of effort to do that, and the help of a 150-ton press to press the blocks out. Yes. um, Amazingly, we're able to get most of them out without damaging things, and the damage that we were able to, or that did occur, we were able to repair very easily without real permanency. Um, so, so this past Saturday, we were actually able to completely cycle a 3-inch block with the ejectors and using a shell casing to simulate how and not simulate, but actually to show the loading process of that gun and how the shell was ejected and all that stuff. So very neat. We find different things with each mount, and each one has its own little quirks. So we work through things. So we're planning to do that with both, obviously the 3-inch. We're going through the 40 mounts as well. We're going through the current 8 20 millimeter mounts that are still aboard the ship, and the 20 millimeter guns that are on those mounts. And then we are also removing the ship's secondary battery, the 6 5-inch 51s. So those will come off either right before the ship goes to the shipyard or in the shipyard, and then they'll get the same treatment. In fact, we will go through those guns a lot more thoroughly than we will any of the others. Mostly because one, they haven't had the attention that the other guns have had, in the last 30, 40 years. Um, but primarily because these guns are the same guns that fired on, well, Normandy and Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And in a certain sense, they have a little bit more history than the 14-inch guns do.
Hmm.
Um, and and also because of their difficulty in just maintenance. These guns, um, they're sitting in a covered area, so they have to come apart to mount. You need at least one crane to get them off the ship because they have to come out in pieces. So the whole mount itself weighs something like 24,000 pounds. The gun itself weighs 12,000 pounds, and you can do the math on the other individual components from there. So it's really difficult, really cumbersome, I should say, to get them off. And we see that this is our best opportunity to do this while the ship is in the shipyard. We have a really dedicated volunteer group who uh, are really coming out and working on these guns. Once we get ready for the ship to go to the shipyard, our staff will transition over and we'll start working on those alongside of our volunteers, and we'll really be able to work a little bit faster. And we also have some industry partners that are helping us with services, like blasting and sandblasting and painting and that kind of thing, and machining. And so a lot of these pieces need new gears, so they're doing those things. So NRG, CPS Houston are certified pipe surface Houston, not child protective services. So
Yeah.
uh, and then Houston Bearing and Supply is donating a good chunk of the gears that we need for the 3-inch guns. So that have been just eat up by corrosion over the time over the years. So so it really is a community effort to get this done, and we are very blessed to be in the community that we are that are giving outpouring and giving so much help unreservedly. So um, you know, I I'm glad that there's excitement for this project for that help to come to the forefront and come to the forefront more um, I guess easily. I guess it made things easier for folks to want to help or to know
Yeah.
that there was a need. So um, but
Yeah.
that's where we're going with that. And then our intention is that the guns will all come back on the ship after or while the ship is in the shipyard, and if not, then shortly after. So everything's going back on the ship. Everything is put back on and be in much better condition than it was before.
It's a shame not more of them will be restored to fully operational order, because I do kind of have this vision of like 4th of July celebrations. Everyone else is celebrating with fireworks, and then Texas is like, yeah, watch this, and just fires off its entire anti-aircraft battery and trace around.
We would absolutely love to do that, and we're not precluding that possibility of doing that. We are
Yeah.
in after all.
Yeah. So that's all the small guns, but obviously Texas also has the 10 big 14-inch guns. So what's happening with that? Are those guns staying on the ship? Because again, in kind of allusions to the Pearl Harbor salvage operation, some of the ships had their guns taken off before they were taken into dry dock. Others had them stay on, some sort of half and half. So are those guns being restored on the ship and staying with the ship, or are they going to be craned off as well?
No, they'll stay on the ship, and it's going to be incredibly cost prohibitive to move them. So, just to give you an idea, one 14-inch gun with the one 14-inch barrel with the breech on it is and block is like 75 tons. So that's a M1A1 tank. So that's one gun. We have 10 of those. So the turret structure itself. For even the shorter turrets, and this is not counting the barbets, this is not counting any of that. That's 575 tons. So turret 3, the middle ship, that's 575 tons of steel. So that to remove that would need an enormously large crane to do that, and those are really cost prohibitive to do. further, all the electrics have to be disconnected. They're not active now, but they'll have to be disconnected. And then the ship has each turret has a number of holding down clips, and having crawled into the tiny area where they are and looked at them firsthand, they're not small. They probably weigh 1,000 pounds each. I mean, they're probably anywhere from, I would say, 36 inches wide to probably 4 foot tall, and the cast steel over an inch thick, so probably closer to 2 inches thick in places. Um, and there's I want to say there's close to 24 per turret. So removing the turrets would be very difficult to do, um, and that's not currently under consideration now. So
Yeah.
believe me, I would love to do that because we'd be able to get access to and preserve parts of of those turrets and then the barbets and that structure that we normally wouldn't be able to do. Um, and and not only that, but it would allow us to really have a good look at the rollers and the roller paths, and maybe get that cleaned up and see if we could train a turret. But unfortunately, right now that's not the consideration. So, I mean, if we
Yeah.
had millions more dollars, then that's something I think that we would look at doing. So,
Yeah.
um, and more time, that's something we look at doing. So,
Yeah. Well, I suppose that again, thinking back historically, when the Royal Navy made the possibly questionable decision to lend HMS Royal Sovereign to the Soviets for a few years, I mean, okay, fair enough. Operating the high Arctic is probably a little bit harsher than sitting in Texas, but after about 3 or 4 years of operation, it came back, and they looked at it and just went, "These turrets are never moving again. It's just not worth it." And I say, okay, fair enough, slightly harsher operational conditions, but then that was 3 or 4 years, not the better part of almost 3/4 of a century.
uh,
Yeah. So, thinking of one of the other places I visited, Western Approaches Command, when they were doing some of their restoration and sort of digging through bits and pieces that they hadn't had a look at for a very long time, and a room that they didn't realize they actually had was hid behind a false wall. They found all sorts of interesting bits and pieces, everything from sort of little slice of life things that people had dropped and never picked up, to sort of missing parts of various components and markers and things like that you see in historical photos, and you think, well, they must not have survived, they're just disposable, but some of them obviously have. So have you found anything similar to that, sort of any interesting bits and pieces that have shown up in the ship while this work has been going on?
uh, well, while this work is going on, not a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, what we have found over the years is, we found when the first round of structural repairs was going on, a blower was being moved out of the way so that steel could come through. And um, the when they moved this blower, out fell a bayonet still in its scabbard, and which is neat on its own part. But the fun part of that was we had a crew member named Maurice Ballard who served on the ship in late 45 and 46 and was part of the crew that laid the ship up as it went into uh, um, um, Hawkins Point at Baltimore, the Navy storage facility there. Um, and he independently and earlier told us a story about how he had stole a bayonet from the Marines, and the Marine detachment that was still on the ship before they left got this bayonet and hid it because he thought he was going to get in trouble because they were telling the crew, well, you can't take contraband off the ship, you can't take anything off the ship. So he hid it before he left the ship, and he told us where he didn't tell us. He didn't tell us quite where he hid it. He just said in this area. So when it came out, it was like, that's that bayonet. That's bayonet. So which was in that general area where he was at, and he talked about. So that was pretty neat. So we definitely got some. We brought him up, invited him back aboard. He lived in this region, so we got him back aboard and showed him the bayonet, and He goes, "Well, can I take it home now?" And we're like, "Part of the ship's history now. Sorry." So we bought him a bayonet and gave him a bayonet. And we found things like that through the years of like things of particularly in berthing areas where guys would take food or their personal like stash of things that they didn't want other folks to go through. They would stick it into the vent ducts above them. A lot of crew, on a ship of this size and in this age, the ventilation wasn't the greatest. So particularly in the summer, the crew would take and um, if they were next to a ventilation duct, they would actually take their knives and they would cut holes in the ventilation duct and just pull a flap out of the way. So now they have their own little personal duct right there on the rack. So a lot of times it sticks things up in there. So whether it was canned goods, so like we found peaches, we found spam, we found all manner of things like this, and then um, you know several before I came aboard, there was a crew member that had, in his oral histories talked about how he had left money and something. I think it was a pipe and a cigar box in the laundry and just stuffed it up into the overhead. Then a crook that no one had seen before, or not no one seen, but it was hard to see and hard to get at. So when the compartment was being restored, they found that box, and it was like all of the stuff that he left in there was still in there. So, which is very neat finding things like that.
Yeah.
We found even though when the ship was going through its last dry docking in 1988, or leading up to that, um, the staff went through the ship very thoroughly and was pulling out anything that was and could be seen as an artifact. So going through all the officers' the desk and drawers and things like that, and pulling out any effects that they found. They'd find letters and things like this. But fast forward 35 years, I was in a stateroom doing a condition survey and found opened up one of the desk drawers, and in it was laying a letter from an officer, from a woman that had wrote an officer a letter in 1943, and basically telling him how much she loved him and why would he spend more time with her and that kind of stuff. It was kind of weird reading that, but at the same time, it was really neat that personal connection and and having read this particular author's oral history is really neat. So
Yeah.
no, I don't know if they got together later on or if they got married. I didn't dig into it that deeply. So
Yeah. Yeah. But no, it's always these little things that bring the ship alive, isn't it? There's all the bits that the crew had and in some cases forgot.
very much, and it's their stories as well. I mean, you know, a ship is wood and steel and brass and bronze and but an object, that object has its history, but really what gives that ship its history, that operational history, is the crew that served aboard and the struggles that they went through, the experiences that they had, and that was I think makes these ships so valuable because other than that, they're it's easy to think of a historic ship or a surviving historic ship or even um, a ship like um, that served and was disposed of, like Enterprise or Warspite or you know um, Nelson or any ship, any major ship, or really any ship period that served for any measurable amount of time. It's easy to think of them as just being an object that did X at Y location, and that contributed to history in Z manner. And but I think it's really the stories that are the men who really make that Y X happen, to make Y happen, to make Z happen. They're really the key part of this. And our big part is not only preserving the ship, but also preserving the stories of the crew and the experiences that they had, because that's what really brings the ship alive, brings these ships alive, and it really is what brings I think people to come to the ship and it allows them to relate to, you know, what is their grandparents, their great grandparents, and sometimes now their great great grandparents. Um, and I think this ship has been, particularly the World War II ships, have been very fortunate that that World War II generation, you know, um, survived, during this big period of ship preservation, because that's people can relate to that being their grandfather, and that gives it a little bit of connection to the ship. I worked on Olympia for a little bit more than 2 years, and that was a great privilege, but it was very hard to get people to relate to that ship because there wasn't that personal connection. She was By the time that she was preserved, there wasn't a lot of World War One veterans that were alive. There's still some alive, but they weren't as engaged because it was very much overshadowed by the World War II generation, and then in subsequent veteran generations. So um, and World War One unfortunately had become the forgotten war. So so having that immediacy, I think, has allowed these World War II ships to build a little bit more deeper connections within their communities, and be more um, have a little bit more longevity than and or I shouldn't say longevity, be a little bit more easier to preserve through revenue generation, through attendance, through donations, and things like that. So
Yeah, I think I was just doing a quick bit of math and in my head, and I worked out in the next 15 or so years, maybe slightly more than that, but easily within our working our lifetimes, we're actually going to reach a point where the launch date of Texas is closer to the founding of the USA than it is to today.
right.
At which point Texas will be more. It'll be more than half as old as the United States itself. So it covers an extremely long period of time for the nation.
That it does. That it does. And you know, through the ship tells us a lot about the construction of. I mean, what the ship tells us a lot through its structure, through how it was built, of you know technological processes at the time, engineering statuses at the time, and you can see that evolution throughout the arc of the ship's uh, life, or particularly the ship's service life. So going from a lot of riveting to in the 20s, which I thought was really interesting, a lot of more welding coming to the spec, and to being used on the ship. And then even further along, you get the radar coming on, and that kind of thing. A lot more technological aspects of it. Um,
Mm.
you see that development, and you can track the development of the technological development of the United States, and really a lot of the major powers at the time, because they were all kind of tracking largely at the same rate. A lot of the major powers,
Mm.
and then at some point everyone did this. So
Yeah,
there's a divergence.
yeah,
But but on the flip side, that tells us about the ship's you know technology. It tells us a lot about technology at the time. But what it also tells us about is the priorities of United States at the time. So both military, political, and geopolitical and diplomatic policy at the time. So, and how the ship kind of fit into that. The other thing that and then with the crew, you really see uh, um, with the crew, you really give it a sense of what life was like during those times, because life aboard the ship was, you know, yes, a slightly harsher reflection, but a slightly harsher reflection of the society of the time. So during those time periods. So um, I think these ships are really good microcosms of the time periods in which they served, and really reflect to a large extent the societies that they came from, and are really good. And I think they do a better job of that than say perhaps a historic house or a historic church or something like that. Not saying that those things don't have value, but I think that these ships have a much greater, or more encompassing. Let's put it that way.
yeah,
So
yeah. Well, I think when it comes to almost any kind of historic building that's not something like, I don't know, a fortress or a castle, and perhaps even then, if you've got a historic house, it's a home. It reflects an aspect of people's lives. If you've got a factory or say a church or something like that, it reflects a certain aspect of people's lives. But it's not they're usually not things that are occupied 24/7
Right.
by everyone. Whereas with a ship, especially a warship, it is the 24/7 home for the crew. It's home, it's work, it's leisure, it's the entire society in one location. Plus, obviously, as we've been saying, all the technology of the time as well.
Right. Well, and obviously it's very much one part of society. It's only the male part of society,
Mm,
and you know, and because, but that's a reflection of society. It was a male-driven society at the time. So,
yeah,
and that's not making any societal comment or judgment on that. It's just how it was at the time. So, and this is a reflection of that. So,
yeah. So, thinking of the ship as an entity, there's been, as you have probably, I'm sure, seen and sometimes despaired at, various rumors and misquotes and things flying around the internet about the state of the ship's structure, the frames, etc. Everything from it's absolutely fine, it doesn't need to be moved, to like the main frames are so and ribs are so rusted through it's going to just collapse on itself the next time there's a stiff breeze. So let's put that straight. What is the actual condition of the ship's overall main structure, the sort of the framework, the ribbing, the keel, that kind of stuff?
so the overall condition of the ship structure is good. I mean, you have a few areas that are of some concern. They're not of concern enough to really for us to be fretful about. There's certainly areas that we'll address in the product, and there are areas that don't preclude us from towing the ship or dry docking the ship. So, and those areas are under the boiler rooms, and we feel through the surveys that were done and the engineering that was done. Like I said, particularly over the past year, there were several intensive studies that were specifically on those areas to determine what the strength of those areas were, and that stuff. Those frames, the keel there, and all that stuff is it's good. It's not in the condition, or it's usable. It's not in the condition we want it in. Like I said, that'll get repaired in the dry dock, but it's not in the condition that would make the ship unsafe to tow. Um, you know, particularly with all the other measures that we're taking to effect. So
Mm-hmm.
the um, what was I going to say? So I mean, the biggest like structural concern that we have on the ship right now is hogging. So I'm sure you know what hogging is, but for everyone else, hogging is you have a ship. So my fingers are being midship, and my palms being the palm, sorry, being ends of the ship. Because the ends of the ship are heavier than the middle. So if you look at Texas, she has a whole lot of weight aft of midship and a whole lot of weight forward in the of midship. So in the form of two turrets forward, and then aft of midship, she has two massive steam engines that are around 500 tons each, and then three turrets that are over 500. I said 575 tons earlier each. So the ship wants to do this. So and then the Navy built the ship that way.
With regards to the status of the ship's repairs at the moment, well, obviously we've talked about the preparations for going to dry dock, where most of the repairs are going to be done. Some of the smaller guns have been taken off. We've got all the foam in there, etc. Are there any other major structural repairs that need to be done to the ship before she can be moved?
At this point, no. The ship is structurally sound enough to move. All of our engineering has been done over the really intensive engineering has been done over the last year or so. Has shown that we're able to tow the ship. Obviously, gingerly, because she is 100 and will be 106 years old in March 12th. So um, so we're treat her with with that kind of level of tenderness. So,
Mhm.
but yes, she's able to survive, to be able to structurally able to be towed, and um, so we don't have any concerns there. Um, so
Yes, and no 2021 not high speed runs down to the dry dock, but she's not gonna just come apart at this point.
Right. We've looked at talking with the salvage company and the naval architects and the tug companies. We feel comfortable that the ship could probably run up close to 10 knots. Um, but we under tug, not in her own power.
Yeah.
But we feel comfortable that she could do that. But the problem with running a ship up to that speed of this size, that's 25,000 or yeah, there are 26,000 tons of steel that you have to slow down. So accelerating not bad, slowing down is a lot worse. So and especially if there's an emergency. So our plan is to keep the tow speeds very slow, like less than a walking speed, so that if we need to slow the ship, we can slow the ship without putting undue strain on the ship. So it's all about managing the stresses on the ship. I mean, again, the ship will be over 106 years old by the time we move her. So we want to treat her gingerly. So just like we would our grandmother or our great grandmother. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So once the ship gets to the dry dock, will it be viewable in the dry dock? Obviously, it's going to be worked on, so people aren't going to be the general public's not going to be coming aboard. But can people kind of come up to the edge of the railing and see the work that's going on? And related to that, obviously, these things don't come free. So how can people support the ship while it's being in the dry dock if they can't sort of pay a ticket admission price to come and have a look at what's happening?
sure. So whether folks will be able to see the ship in the shipyard in person, that's kind of an unknown. It depends on which shipyard the ship actually is going to. Um, we are in the process of refining that right now, and through all the delays from COVID and whatnot that we've had, it's actually kind of worked in our favor to allow us to have more time to play not to play the market, but to work the market, to let free market forces work for us in our advantage and help us get better get the best deal that we can for the ship to get the most bang out of the funding that we have. And um, so that's kind of unknown right now. Obviously, we love people to be able to see the ship in the dock. No matter what we do or where the ship goes for dry dock and that viewability, we are going to be doing weekly time lapses of the ship in the dock, so you can see kind of the repair work. We'll be uploading that weekly. That's the current plan. We've hired a company to do that for us. We've hired a company the same company is also doing kind of the creating our own internal kind of documentary for this project. So there's already been hundreds and hundreds of hours of video shot that they've done and that we've done ourselves using GoPros and whatnot. So everything from getting actually putting a camera into the tank while the film is being shot in, it's not as exciting as you think it is, but it's just as messy as you think it is. So,
Yeah.
um, so it's capturing that phases of that of the project. The gun project. It's going to capture the tow, the ship, coming out of the water in the dry dock, the repairs, ship going back in the water, and the tow to the new berth, those type of things. So we're trying to document this as much as possible. We'll be releasing short videos. We've already released one short video, kind of a how you can kind of help video. You can see it at Facebook page. I believe it's on our website now at battleshiptexas.org. If you'd like to help, contribute to this project, we do have a donate link there. And if you want to buy some Battleship Texas merchandise, yes,
Yes.
uh, you can buy this lovely mug right here on our website as well. So and along with t-shirts and sweatshirts and all kinds of things. So or even pieces of the ship. So from ship that was steel that was removed from previous repair projects, bad steel. So um, there's a lot of all those are ways. Yes, even though you're purchasing something else, that does help us. Donations are greatly appreciated, and then And if you live in the Houston area, or even if you don't live in the Houston area and you want to come down and volunteer, that's something that we can definitely look into. Welcome. We're not actively recruiting right now, but recruiting volunteers. But if you want to come help, we can see if we can find a way for you to help. So, um,
Cool.
yeah.
I have some ideas about that. I might discuss those with you once we've finished the actual interview side of things. So, final question is: obviously, we don't know exactly when. I don't know. Do we? If we do know when the ship is exactly going into dry dock, but once it goes into the dry dock, roughly how long is it estimated the overhaul will take to complete? And then once that's done, do we have any idea of where the ship is going to go after that?
So I can answer that vaguely. So mostly not because of trying to be evasive or anything. It's just we're still in the process of developing those things. So right now we are anticipating that the ship will be in dry dock probably midsummer, the June July timeframe. Um, and that may slide depending on circumstances. So we're not really throwing a hard marker down and saying this date, this time. But as things progress and as that date becomes more real, or that time frame becomes more real, then we go from this down to this to when we actually have the specific date, specific time when the ship's leaving the current berth and going to the shipyard. So, and then as far as that time frame goes, it really depends on which shipyard we select. We have getting close anywhere from a range of 6 months all the way up to 11 months. So on the worst case scenario, we've been saying 11 months to a year for the ship to be in brought up. So, um, um, and as far as the new home goes for the ship, we are actively working with several different entities who are interested in being the host location for the ship's new berth. So those locations that range anywhere if they're still in the Houston Galveston area. So um, if you're familiar with this region, so basically Baytown all the way to Galveston. I mean, Baytown's about 5 miles from where the ship's currently at now. Um, I think we have, if I remember correctly, we have four total locations that are potential sites for the ship, that are viable potential sites for the ship. So we are pursuing that, and again, same with the dry dock, and same with the shipyard, trying to get the best deal that we can for the ship, for the long term viability of the ship. So, and those things are, those long term viability things for birds are, how long um, are what's the cost for the ship to be in the berth? How many visitors a year do we think that we can get there? And what kind of financial obligations will we have to be in that berth? So, you know, preservation, sadly, is really wrapped around dollars. So without dollars or currency, you can't have preservation. It just doesn't happen, especially with something as big and uh, as capital intensive as a ship is, and really a ship of this size. So I'm just fortunate that we're taking care of a battleship of this size and not taking care of an Iowa class or a Midway or
Yeah.
so. Um, but it all comes down. It all comes at the end of the day down to dollars and how many how much money you can bring in to put to the ship to save the ship. Because at the end of the day, it's not for us. We're nonprofit, so it's not about making money or having a stock dividend or anything like that. It's money comes in, it goes to the ship. It pays salaries, it keeps the lights on, it coats steel, it helps restore places in the ship, it creates exhibits, it creates educational programming, and it helps us develop deeper ties within the community. So, which is another key aspect of the long term preservation of really any ship. So,
Cool. Okay. Well, that kind of wraps up the questions that we had scheduled. So yeah, thank you very much again for your time, and hopefully everything goes well with the remaining work, getting the ship moved into dry dock, and who knows, depending on how it all goes, as you may or may not know, I've had an on paper plan to visit various museum ships in the States, and originally that was all supposed to happen April last year. Shockingly, for obvious reasons, that didn't happen. So yeah, depending on how everything goes, I may be in the States August this year, tentatively. I'm not going to put any money on that at the moment, again for obvious reasons. But yeah, hopefully, if that does happen at that point, the ship will probably maybe just recently have been into dock or about to go. And if it does, that doesn't happen this year, then maybe the work will actually be done and it'll be in its new home by the time I'm in the States. You never know if I end up having to come over in 2022.
Exactly. Well, either way, look us up and drop us a line, and we're happy to talk more and show what's going on. So
Yeah.
that's one thing, is we're very proud of the work that's happening here, and it's not. I guess it's I said probably left before the fall, but we're very proud of the work that's happened here, because of there's just a lot of things that have come together to make this project happen, and a lot of people have put in a lot of hard work, and a lot of sleepless nights, and a lot of tears, and a few drops of blood here and there. So unfortunately, but including my own. So, um, but yeah, like I said, we're happy to show off what we're doing. We're very we want people to know, and we want people to see. And one of the things that the thing about this ship is that it's not only just a you're talking about the service impact of this ship, and its operational history, but it has had an impact beyond that, in its museum ship state, and it's become somewhat, in ways, and some of the techniques that have been used on the ship, a lot of cautionary stuff has come from it. So I won't say the ship is entirely a cautionary tale. I don't think that's accurate at all. But I think certain things that were done to the ship have definitely become cautionary tales that have led other ships not to do things, or to do things differently. Very good.
Don't cover the decks in concrete, people.
Precisely. Don't bash your ship with brackish water.
Yeah.
Ship more frequently. But again, a lot of those things are functions of what we just talked about earlier. It's functions of dollars. So you can only do with what you have, but you make the best of what you have. And that's certainly what we're doing. I think that's certainly what our immediate predecessors were doing. Was making the best of what they had. And it's all about continual growth, continual building. And again, we want to show that this ship is making progress, that those apocryphal tales on the internet are about the ship collapsing and sinking and whatnot are just what they are. They're apocryphal. They're, as you very very accurately said earlier, they're fairy tales. So and they definitely are. They're haunting us. And the only way that we can get past them is to and just talk about them. I mean, show what we're doing and show the quality of what we're doing. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, cool. There will be links in the video description for people who want to visit the website. Say buy merchandise, support the ship, etc. So take a look down there, and hopefully, one way or another, we'll be revisiting this topic again at some point, and see how much progress has happened at that point.
Excellent, and thank you for having us, the ship, and thank you for me. So this has been great. Enjoyed it.
All right, thank you. And of course, good news, everyone. Texas will be briefly reopening shortly after the release date of this video. So this video is being released on the 30th of June 2021, and over this coming weekend, the 3rd and 4th of July, Texas will be temporarily reopened for visitors. So if you happen to be in Texas or can easily get to Texas and you want to see what state the ship is in at the moment, head on down over there. I'm sure they'll appreciate the support, and say hi to the ship for me, because it's going to be at least several months before I can see it, if not longer. And yeah, enjoy. And let's hope that she gets back into her new home at some point in the future in tip-top spick and span shape.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.